Running short on antibiotics. New guidelines are out. Well, welcome back to Broken Head. We travelled today from Uluru, woke up this morning in Uluru, onto the aeroplane fairly successfully. Had a pretty strange experience at the airport, actually. Showed up and there was nobody there. And I'm like, oh no, we've missed the plane. But apparently what happens is that the entire crew, like the people catching the plane, all come on buses early. And so only the people who've hired cars show up later. And so literally no queue, nobody there. I'm like, oh my goodness. But then once we got through security, everyone was there. Plane flight, pretty uneventful. Headed back to Brisbane, got to see my family, got to see my dad, which was difficult. He has late stage dementia, broke his hip about 18 months ago, and is really not in a great way, becoming much more skinny, agitated, kind of talking to himself. It's fairly distressing. Like, if you haven't seen a late stage dementia patient, then it is a curious thing of how we treat these people. And it's not that he doesn't have good care. He has excellent care. It's just his quality of life is atrocious. It's terrible. And so that is the situation that it is. It's like, oh, wow, okay. And he was very clear. He was like, if I ever end up like this, please just give me the pillows. My dad had quite a dark sense of humor. And he just like, yeah, just choke me. I'm like, Dad, you got to be kidding me, you know? And then here he is. So we then jumped in the car. My wife drove and arrived back in our house. We had a dog sitter here, and she's taken really good care of the house. I tried to change the filters underneath our water, but they are jammed on so tight. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Got to find a special tool to try and change those. That's one of the jobs. But overall, house is in good condition. Our dog's excited to see us. And I was reading the news today, the GP news, that we now have a shortage of quite a few antibiotics. You may have seen this, but it looked like most of the major antibiotics that we use in general practice are now in a shortage. And here's some other guidelines for when you can't use the ones that you would normally use. Here's what to do, which is very helpful, extremely helpful. It's like, okay, great. Now, we've got a couple of challenges. One is finding that email when I need to use it. And this comes down to a knowledge access problem. Like, how do you access these changed guidelines? Because things are changing all the time in medicine. And hopefully it'll easily be a Google search away and come up and like, great, new guidelines for antibiotics. The more concerning thing for me is this is proclaimed to be a temporary thing. But once upon a time I was in America, and the temporary bridge that had been built many years before had become permanent. And so the concern is, will this be temporary or will this be permanent? Because there wasn't a discussion around why are we dealing with a shortage of antibiotics at all? Is this some temporary factory problem? Is this some ongoing issue? That, to me, was much more important than, like, yes, the guidelines are important, but it's like, what are we going to do longer term? Will this be resolved? Should Australia even consider starting up an antibiotics company just so we've got supplies for ourselves? I presume that most of the pharma companies are overseas owned and all these medications come from overseas. But it'd be nice, just as a backup, just in case we had like some event where everything got shut down again, that we could actually supply our own pharmaceuticals. And given that these antibiotics are fairly common ones, I mean, it was like amoxicillin and trimethoprim and Careflex. I mean, they weren't unusual antibiotics. They're like bread and butter medications to use for us in general practice. But not a lot of discussion around, hey, how are we going to fix this? What's the problem? Because sorting out the real problem is actually what we need to do. Why are there no antibiotics? Was it because of COVID and they shut down production and there just simply hasn't been enough production and they're trying to rebuild stores? Or is there excessive amounts of usage by the world and all the antibiotics are getting used up in Europe and America? Is that the cause of it? And we need to ramp up production that way. But not knowing the cause leaves me concerned. I'm like, well, is this temporary? And when we start burning through the alternative antibiotics, what are we going to do? I remember a long time ago, or not that long ago, our concern was around superbugs, that there was so much antibiotic usage going on that we'd run into superbugs. But we don't have to worry about superbugs if we've got no antibiotics. So it is of concern to me. It's like, hey, should we, even if it's much more expensive, actually start up production in Australia for antibiotics? But that really depends on the cause, and that is not spoken to in at least the news articles that I saw. Working out what the actual problem is and solving that is critical. If you solve for the wrong problem, you're not going to fix it. If you solve for the right problem, even if that is more difficult and more awkward and more unpleasant to look at least you know what the real problem is. Pretending that it's something else, that the reason we have no antibiotics is because they all got used up. But in actual fact, the problem is they all got used up because there's been no production. These are two very different problems. Have we used them all up because we used too much? Okay, we need to ration the usage or check, are we using antibiotics correctly? Now, certainly, hopefully, antibiotic usage is pretty well regulated in Australia. Like many GPs and many people have been educated around, hey, you don't need antibiotics for viruses. Don't use it. But if it's because we just don't have enough antibiotics at all and production's gone down, then guess what? It's going to take a while to get that up and running. It's unlikely that we can suddenly start up a new antibiotic production factory tomorrow. It's going to take a while. So getting the cause right, thinking about what the cause is, problem identification. What's the real problem? Even if it's difficult to look at, you're like, that really sucks. Why did we close all our antibiotic factories down in the first place? Oh, that's right. Before COVID, there was a globalization movement where it was best to send things to the cheapest place when then send them back to the more expensive countries. But COVID taught us that suddenly all of those things can be found to be a little bit more fragile than we once expected. So, keen to know if you do know what's going on, why we do not have enough antibiotics, and should we be prepared for longer term shortages, then let me know in the comments below. All right, that's all I got for you. I'm going to go hang out with my family. It's good to be home. Great to be home. Really looking forward to going back to work tomorrow. I got nursing home. I've also got a skin check for myself. If you're a doctor and you don't have a GP and get skin checks, then hey, you should be doing that. It's important, looking after your own health as a role model for others. Be very careful about asking other people to do what you will not do. All right, that's all I got for you. Look forward to catching you again on another episode very soon.